I once thought old age would be very different. In my dreams, Francis and I sat on the veranda of our Wilmington home, holding hands and watching our grandchildren play on the lawn. Now the veranda is empty, and my only grandson, 6-year-old Noah, shows up at my house so infrequently that he hardly recognizes me when he meets me. My name is Lloyd Harrington, and I am 68 years old. I've spent the last 12 of those years alone in the house Francis and I bought 40 years ago when I was just starting my business, making specialized electronics for laboratories. The modest 2-story house on Maple Street witnessed the blossoming of our love, the birth of our son Aiden, and the slow decline of my wife, whom cancer took too soon. In the mornings, I make myself black tea. Frances never liked coffee, and I weaned myself off of it after her death. This ritual has remained unchanged, like so much else in my house. Her chair by the window, the collection of ceramic birds on the mantel, the old photo albums in the bookcase. I don't touch anything, as if she might come back at any moment and find I've moved something. My son Aiden doesn't understand this. "Dad, you need to move on," he says on rare occasions. And his wife Pearl doesn't even try to hide her irritation. Her gaze wandering around my house is always full of appraisal and judgment, as if she's mentally calculating how much all this might be worth. Pearl came into Aiden's life 5 years ago. They'd met at some charity event where she worked as an organizer, tall, slim, with perfectly styled brown hair and a smile that never reaches her eyes. From the first time we met, I sensed the falseness in her courtesy, but kept silent. Aiden looked happy for the first time in a long time, and I didn't want to dampen his joy. After Francis died, our relationship with our son had become strained. Perhaps I'd gotten too caught up in work, trying to dull the pain of loss. Maybe I didn't give him enough attention when he needed it. Aiden was so much like his mother, the same soft facial features, the same kind eyes, that every glance at him tore a barely healed wound. I know that's no excuse. A good father would have found a way to deal with the grief and support his son. I wasn't a good father. When Aiden announced his engagement 3 years ago, I genuinely tried to be happy for him. I made a toast at the wedding, talking about how happy Frances would be to see her son with such a beautiful girl. Pearl smiled then, but there was calculation in her eyes. This woman looked at my son not as a loved one, but as a bargain. After the wedding, I gave them a house, a small but cozy mansion in the prestigious area of Wilmington. I could afford it. My company had become one of the leading companies in the industry, and Aiden had just gotten a job as a curator at an art museum. A prestigious job, but not very lucrative. I wanted them to have their own space, a place where they could build their family. What I didn't say at the time, and I regret it now, was that I technically still owned the house. I paid for it in full, but drew up the paperwork so that Aiden and Pearl had the right to live there for life until I decided otherwise. It was reinsurance, an intuitive distrust of the woman my son had chosen. Frances would call it my paranoia, but Frances was no longer around to keep me from making mistakes. Wilmington isn't an overly large town, but it's spacious enough to avoid unwanted encounters. Over the years, I've learned to pick routes that don't overlap with places Aiden and Pearl go. I know their schedule. Pearl likes to share her every move on social media. On Thursdays, she meets up with her friends at the Blue Lagoon Cafe. On Tuesdays, Aiden works late at the museum because of new exhibitions. On weekends, they're often out of town or out with Pearl's friends, young married couples with whom I have absolutely nothing to talk about. My days are much like one another. Morning tea, newspaper, checking email. Even though I officially retired 5 years ago, the company still consults me on important matters. After lunch, a walk in Riverside Park, where all the regulars know me. In the evening, a book or documentary. Sometimes a call to an old friend, Walter, who moved to Florida after retirement. Today I broke my usual route and went to the supermarket, which I usually avoid because of its proximity to Aiden's house. I was picking out a bottle of wine for dinner when I heard her voice, harsh, with the characteristic tone of superiority that Pearl uses when speaking to service staff. "I told you clearly, no frozen meat. Do you realize Thanksgiving is in 3 days? I want a fresh turkey, not this misunderstanding." I froze behind the wine rack, not wanting to be seen. Through a gap between bottles, I could see her reprimanding a young meat department employee who looked completely confused. Ma'am, we're getting fresh turkeys tomorrow morning. If you could... Tomorrow? Are you kidding me? I have every hour until the holiday. I can't waste time going back and forth to your store because of your incompetence. I saw other shoppers awkwardly avert their eyes, or, on the contrary, watch the scene with curiosity. Pearl was in her element, the center of attention, a victim of circumstances, a woman who knows her rights and won't let anyone infringe on them. When the store manager finally calmed her down by promising to deliver the turkey personally to her house tomorrow, I was about to leave discreetly, but she turned and noticed me. Her face froze for a moment, then transformed into a fake smile. "Lloyd, what a surprise! Doing some holiday shopping?" I nodded, picking up the bottle of wine as an excuse for my presence. "A little stockpile for the winter." "Oh, we were just about to call you." Her voice turned sugary. "Sweet. Aiden insists you join us for Thanksgiving. It'll be a small group. My parents, a couple friends from the museum. You wouldn't say no, would you?" There was a challenge in her eyes. She knew I'd rather spend the day alone, as I'd been doing for the last few years. She also knew that a direct refusal would give her an excuse to reproach me once again for my indifference to my son. "Of course," I answered. "What time should I arrive?" 4 o'clock. And don't worry about anything. I'll organize everything." Her tone implied that my help was not only unnecessary, but unwelcome. I didn't even offer to bring wine. It would surely have been deemed insufficiently refined for Pearl's guests. When I got home, my phone showed a missed call from Aiden. I didn't call back. Knowing my son, he just wanted to make sure Pearl had extended the invitation. Our conversations lately had been reduced to exchanges of information and awkward pauses. I sat in Frances's chair and looked at the picture on the mantelpiece. Our last vacation together in the mountains, 6 months before her diagnosis. She's smiling into the camera, her red hair fluttering in the wind and her hand gripping mine tightly. "What would you do, Frances?" I asked the picture. "How would you find common ground with a woman who only sees your son as a stepping stone to welfare?" Frances has always been the peacemaker in our family. She would find a way to smooth over the sharp edges, to see something good in Pearl that escapes my gaze. Or maybe Pearl would have behaved differently if Frances were alive. My late wife had an amazing ability to bring out the best in people, a quality I, alas, have not inherited. Thanksgiving, a holiday when families come together to give thanks for all the good things in their lives. Once upon a time, Frances and little Aiden and I spent this day cooking together, laughing at family jokes, sharing stories over dinner. Now it's just another day on the calendar, marked by awkward attempts to portray family togetherness. Last year, I declined the invitation, citing a cold. The year before that, I spent the holiday with Walter and his family in Florida. But you can't avoid it forever. Aiden is my only son, my blood. Maybe if I took a step toward him, he'd try to bridge the gap between us too. I looked at the clock, almost midnight. Thanksgiving is in 3 days, 72 hours until I sit down at the table with a woman who despises me and a son who can barely find words in my presence. With Pearl's parents, whom I've met twice, and from whom the same aura of condescension emanates as from their daughter. With the museum friends who would politely question me about my past while pretending to be genuinely interested. I turned off the light and went upstairs to the bedroom. The bed, too big for one, seemed especially empty tonight. Before I went to bed, I did what I'd done every night for the past 12 years. I kissed Frances' picture on the bedside table and whispered, "Good night, my love." And like every night, my answer was only silence. Thanksgiving morning greeted me with gray skies and drizzling rain, typical Wilmington weather for November, a dank dampness that made old bones and memories ache. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling and gathering my strength for the day ahead. The clock read 7 a.m., 9 more hours until I met up with the family that had long since ceased to be mine. Aiden had called the night before. The conversation was short and tense. "Dad, are you sure you're coming tomorrow?" I could hear the anxiety in his voice, as if he feared my refusal and hoped for it at the same time. "Yes, son. I promised Pearl when we met at the supermarket." "That's good." Pause. "She works very hard, you know. Cooking first thing in the morning, decorating the house." I didn't say anything. We both knew cooking wasn't Pearl's greatest talent, and her sense of style in decorating the house only perplexed me. But my son was protective of his wife, and I respected that, even if I didn't think she deserved such devotion. 4 o'clock, right? I asked to fill the pause. Yes, and, Dad? His voice got quieter. Please be nice to Pearl's parents. It was a little awkward last time. Awkward. What a mild word to describe the disaster that was our only Christmas together 2 years ago. Then Pearl's mother, Imogene Brannigan, a socialite with the manners of a queen and the vocabulary of a market trader after her third glass of wine, started asking me about my little business and how it was a shame Aiden wasn't following in my footsteps and wasting his potential on those pictures in the museum. Her husband, Bartholomew, a former economics professor with the look of a man who has to talk to idiots forever, chided her, occasionally inserting remarks about the decline of cultural values in modern society. Pearl sat there looking like a martyr, while Aiden tried helplessly to turn the conversation to neutral topics. I held my ground until Imogene started talking about how people of his generation were completely ignorant of the modern world. Then I calmly reminded her that my small business provided jobs for 67 employees, including 2 PhDs I had poached from her husband's university with better terms. The evening ended early, and from then on, Pearl's parents and I made do with formal greetings on the rare occasions we met. I'll be polite, Aiden, I promised my son. I'm always polite. I know, Dad. It's important to Pearl, and for me. After the call, I sat in the living room for a long time, going over memories of other times I'd met Pearl. Our first dinner, when Aiden brought her to meet me. She'd been the epitome of suave, asking the right questions, smiling in all the right places. But her eyes, cold, appraising eyes, gave away her true thoughts. I saw her studying the furnishings of my house, taking note of the antique furniture, the paintings on the walls, the collection of rare books. I'd seen her face change when Aiden talked about my company. Then there was their engagement. Pearl had insisted on dinner at an expensive restaurant, where she'd defiantly argued with me about the choice of wine, even though I was friends with the owner of the winery she'd so dismissively rejected. Aiden was too happy then to notice the tension between us, and I loved my son too much to mar his joy, a wedding I felt like an outsider at. Pearl had assigned me a seat at the far table, explaining it was some sort of seating complication. Her parents sat next to the newlyweds, as did her many friends. My few guests, old friends and a couple of co-workers, politely pretended not to notice the humiliation. And then those 3 years of estrangement, when I saw my son less and less often, and Pearl increasingly acted as gatekeeper, deciding when and where we could meet. Aiden called, usually when she was busy, and our conversations grew shorter and more superficial. The gift of a house was going to make a difference. I had hoped my gesture would be taken as an olive branch, a sign that I accepted their marriage and wished them happiness. Instead, Pearl took it for granted, and my reluctance to completely rewrite the papers in their name as distrust. Don't worry, Lloyd. We're not going to sell your precious house, she said then, deliberately emphasizing the word your. I sighed and rose from my chair. It was time to get ready to leave. It was tradition for Thanksgiving guests to bring something to the table. I decided not to experiment and chose the safe option, a bottle of good wine from my cellar. The 2,000-year-old Chateau Margaux is one of the best in my collection. Pearl would likely find reason to criticize this choice as well, but the other guests would probably appreciate it. Then came the question of what to wear. I opened the closet and took a long look at the rows of suits, shirts, and ties. Frances always helped me with my special occasion clothing choices. Not that tie, dear. It makes you look too severe, I thought I heard her voice. I chose the dark blue suit she'd given me for my 60th birthday, a white shirt and a tie with a barely there pattern, formal enough for a holiday, but not so formal as to look aloof. After showering and shaving, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The wrinkles had gotten deeper over the last year. My hair had turned completely gray, but my eyes were still the same. Frances always said she fell in love with me because of my eyes, so attentive and kind. I wondered if Aiden could see anything in them now, other than tiredness and disappointment. After getting dressed, I went down to the kitchen and made myself a light breakfast. Toast with jam and a cup of tea. There would be plenty of food for dinner, and I didn't want to offend the landlady with my lack of appetite, though I doubted Pearl would notice if I ate anything at all. The time dragged painfully slowly. I tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate on the words. I turned on the TV. The endless holiday parades and cheesy movies only made me feel more lonely. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was ready to go, though I didn't have to leave until 4:30. I pulled out an old photo album, the one with the pictures of little Aiden in it. Here he was taking his first steps. Here he was blowing out the candles on his 5th birthday cake. Here he was sitting on my shoulders at the zoo. Here he was standing proud in his graduation gown. In every photo, there is either me or Francis next to him, often both of us. A happy family that seemed unshakable until illness shattered our world. I closed the album when I reached the last pictures with Francis, pale, gaunt, but still smiling. It was beyond me even now, 12 years later. At 4:30, I carefully packed the bottle of wine in a gift bag, put on my coat, and left the house. My car, a 7-year-old Lincoln Executive, was the only luxury I'd allowed myself since the sale of the company. Pearl had once called it old-fashioned, suggesting that a man of my means might have chosen something more modern and impressive, but I liked the car's thoroughness, its subdued comfort, its lack of flashy details. The drive to Aiden and Pearl's house took about 20 minutes. I deliberately arrived at 4 o'clock, not early so as not to interfere with the preparations, and not late so as not to give them any reason to be unhappy. Parking in front of the house, I sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering my courage. The house looked festive, with garlands and decorations through the windows and 2 large ceramic turkeys at the front door. Typical Pearl, pretentious and pretentious. When I bought this house, it looked very different. An elegant Victorian mansion with character and history. Now, after Pearl's updates, it looked like a picture from a glossy magazine, immaculate but impersonal. I remembered the day I first saw the house. The real estate agent, knowing my preferences, had found several options in historic Wilmington, and I liked this one the best. Built in 1899 by a successful merchant, it still had the original wood paneling, stained glass windows, and marble fireplaces. I imagined Aiden and Pearl living here, maybe having more children, grandchildren running around the spacious rooms. My dreams were shattered. Pearl immediately started renovating, eliminating most of the historic details in favor of modern minimalism. Aiden didn't mind. He'd always deferred to her when it came to home improvement. I kept my mouth shut because the house was technically a gift from him, though legally it was still mine. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and headed for the front door. With each step, a sense of unease grew. Thanksgiving is a holiday of family togetherness. But what do you do if family only exists on paper? At the door, I hesitated, then determinedly pressed the bell. Voices and laughter came from inside. The guests had already gathered. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Aiden appeared on the doorstep. His face was a mixture of relief and tension. "Dad, I'm glad you came." He hugged me, and for a moment I felt a warmth that reminded me of a time when there hadn't been a wall of misunderstanding between us. "Shukram, I promised," I replied simply, handing him the bag of wine. Aiden looked inside and whistled. "Chateau Margaux?" "Wow. Thanks, Dad." Pearl appeared from the back of the house, dressed in a flawless burgundy-colored dress, her hair and makeup perfect, as if she were getting ready for a magazine photo shoot rather than a family dinner. "Lloyd, finally!" Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "Everyone's already here. We were just waiting for you." She stepped closer, and I could smell the expensive perfume. Pearl nuzzled the air near my cheek, an imitation of the kiss that was our usual greeting. "I brought wine," I said, nodding at the bag in Aiden's hands. "Oh, how nice." Pearl took the bag, glimpsed the bottle, and handed it to a woman in a waitress's uniform as she passed by. "Add to the collection, Doris." I held back a sigh. Of course, Pearl had hired a waitstaff. She never missed an opportunity to show off her status. Status gained through my money, though she would never admit it. "Come on in, everyone in the living room." She gestured in the direction, as if I hadn't been in this house before, as if I hadn't chosen it, paid for it, and given it to them. I walked into the spacious living room where the guests were already gathered. Imogene and Bartholomew Brannigan were sitting on the sofa with glasses in their hands. Next to them, a couple I didn't know, apparently the same, friends from the museum. In the corner of the room, little Noah was playing with a tablet under the supervision of a nanny, Another reminder that Pearl prefers to delegate parental responsibilities when they interfere with her social life. Here comes the patriarch of the household. Bartholomew stepped up to meet me, extending his hand. His tone was condescending, as if he were addressing an amusing old man, rather than a man whose fortune was several times greater than his own. Bartholomew, Imogen. I nodded to them both, shaking their outstretched hands. It's good to see you in good health. Oh, we're hanging in there. Imogen saluted me with her glass. At our age, every day without a new sore is a holiday, isn't it? I smiled politely, ignoring the hint of my age. Imogen was barely 5 years younger than I was, but she preferred to position herself as a member of a different, younger generation. Aidan hurried to introduce me to the other guests, Oliver and Vivian Talbot, curators of contemporary art at the museum where my son worked. They appeared to be a pleasant middle-aged couple, without the pretension and snobbery that characterized Pearl's entourage. Mr. Harrington, Aidan has told me a lot about you. Vivian smiled. Your impressionist collection must be impressive. I looked at my son in surprise. Indeed, I had a small but valuable collection of paintings gathered over the years. I hadn't realized Aidan had mentioned it in conversations with colleagues. He exaggerates, I replied modestly. Just a few paintings I'd been lucky enough to acquire when prices were reasonable. Dad never brags about his acquisitions, Aidan interjected, and I heard a note of pride in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time when talking about me. Pearl came toward us, holding a glass of champagne. Lloyd, what can I get you? We have some excellent champagne, martinis, whiskey. Champagne, please. I chose the least strong option. I needed a clear head tonight. Pearl snapped her fingers, beckoning for the waitress, and I noticed Vivian and Oliver exchange glances. Apparently, I wasn't the only one embarrassed by the ostentatious opulence of the party. After getting my glass, I stepped back to the window, looking out at the backyard, where there had once been a beautiful rose garden. Now there was a fancy barbecue area and a hot tub, another improvement from Pearl. Grandpa, a child's voice suddenly sounded, and I felt small arms wrap around my legs. I lowered my gaze and saw Noah looking at me with a genuine joy that is so rare in this house. Hello, champ. I crouched down to give my grandson a hug. How are you doing? Grown up since the last time we met. I know. Mommy says I'll soon be as tall as Daddy, Noah said proudly. I drew you a picture. Do you want to see it? Sure, I smiled, for the first time all day. Noah ran off to get his drawing, and I caught Pearl's gaze, wary, almost hostile. She didn't like it when I interacted with my grandson without her supervision. Maybe she was afraid I'd tell him something that would undermine her authority. Or maybe she just didn't want us to be close. Noah came back with a piece of paper with 3 figures on it, a large, a medium, and a small. It's you, Dad, and me, he explained. We're going fishing together, like in the story you told me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, I'd told Noah about our fishing trips with Aidan when he was a kid. I didn't think my grandson would remember. It's a beautiful drawing, Noah. Can I keep it? Of course you can. I drew it especially for you. Noah, don't bother your grandfather, interposed Pearl, who was suddenly at his side. Go and help Nanny set the children's table. The boy ran off obediently, and Pearl turned to me. Dinner's almost ready. I hope you're hungry, Lloyd. My turkey was especially good this year. I nodded, folding my grandson's drawing and tucking it into the inside pocket of my jacket, closer to my heart, which suddenly clenched with a premonition that this evening was going to be much harder than I'd expected. The dining room in Aidan and Pearl's house was decorated with pretentious elegance. The table, set for 10, was decorated with candles and silver candlesticks, gold-rimmed china, and crystal glasses. The centerpiece was a huge vase with autumn flowers. The composition looked too perfect to have been made by a non-professional. The seating had been carefully arranged, and I wasn't surprised to find my seat at the far end of the table, as far away as possible from Pearl, who had taken the lead. Aidan sat on her right hand, Pearl's parents on her left. The Talbots were placed closer to the center, and Noah's nanny, Heather, was next to me. Noah himself sat at a separate kids' table in the corner of the room, even though he was the only child at the party. Can't Noah sit with us? I asked Aidan as he walked by. Pearl thinks he'd be bored listening to grown-up talk, he answered with a guilty smile. Besides, he might get the tablecloth dirty. I didn't say anything. though I wanted to remind him that when he was his age, Aiden had always sat at the table with us. I decided to avoid conflict today for my son and grandson's sake. When everyone was seated, Pearl majestically brought in the turkey, or rather pretended to carry it herself, though the bulk of the weight was carried by the waitress who followed her like a shadow. Voila, Pearl announced. It's my grandmother's signature recipe with 32 herbs and spices. It looks delicious, dear, Imogene sang out. You were always gifted culinarily. I held back a smile, remembering how Aiden had confessed last year that they ordered most of their food from the restaurant because Pearl hated to cook. Before we begin, Pearl said, raising her glass, I'd like to make a toast. To our family, both near and far. To another year together. Everyone raised their glasses. I noted the wording in those far away, a subtle hint of my absence from their daily lives. And I'd like to add, Aiden said suddenly, to my father who is with us today. Thanks for coming, Dad. I nodded to my son, feeling an unexpected warmth in my chest. Maybe not all was lost between us. Pearl smiled, strained, and signaled the waitress to begin serving. The dishes were passed around: turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, pumpkin pie. So, Lloyd, Bartholomew interrupted the silence that had begun. How is your company doing since you left? Is it still afloat? More than afloat, I answered calmly. The last quarter was a record profit. The new management is doing great. I'm surprised, Bartholomew said. Usually after the founder leaves, the business goes through a bad time. Maybe it's because I prepared the successors properly, I said, and I stayed on the board to ensure a smooth transition. Oh, so you still haven't let go of the reins completely? Imogene picked up on that. That would explain the success. I noticed Aiden tense up. He'd always hated those passive, aggressive outbursts from his father. In-law and mother. In-law. Actually, Lloyd made a very wise move, Oliver Talbot interjected. We were studying the history of your company at the museum as part of an exhibition on the industrial development of the region. It's an impressive strategy for handing over control. I nodded gratefully at Oliver. It was nice to meet someone who was genuinely interested in the business, rather than trying to hurt me at every opportunity. And you, Heather, Pearl turned to the nanny. Are things going well with Noah? I've noticed he's been a little naughty lately. Oh, I wouldn't say naughty, Heather replied cautiously. Just curious. He's a very smart boy. Maybe he just lacks discipline. Pearl glanced in my direction. At his age, he needs a firm hand. At his age, he needs a lot of love and attention, I argued. Kids can sense when adults are really spending time with them and when they're just celebrating. There was an awkward silence. Pearl pressed her lips into a thin line, and Aiden lowered his eyes guiltily. Everyone has their own ideas about parenting, Pearl said with a strained smile. Some methods get old, you know. Good parenting never gets old, I said quietly, looking at my grandson. The conversation turned to neutral topics: exhibitions at the museum, the weather, the latest city news. I ate in silence, occasionally supporting the conversation with short comments. The food was delicious, though impersonal, like in an expensive restaurant, where everything is perfect, but lacks the special warmth of home cooking. Lloyd, I hear you recently donated a substantial sum to the local hospital, Imogene said suddenly. That's very commendable. How did you know that? I asked, surprised. I preferred not to publicize my philanthropy. Oh, it's hard to hide anything in a small town like Wilmington, she smiled, especially when it comes to such generous gestures. Is it just a coincidence, Pearl interjected, that the hospital announced the new pediatric ward right after Noah went in with appendicitis? I looked up, meeting my sister-in-law's gaze. The hospital had long needed to improve pediatrics. I was just speeding up the process. How convenient, Pearl said. If only you'd take the same interest in your grandson on ordinary days, not just in emergencies. Honey, Aiden said warningly. What? I'm just saying it would be nice if Lloyd visited Noah on a regular basis, instead of showing up only in emergencies to play the hero. You know exactly why I don't visit my grandson more often, I said quietly, and it's not my decision. Well, of course it's all my fault, Pearl sighed theatrically. A horrible daughter. In-law who won't let her father, in-law, see his grandson. Or maybe it's the fact that your visits always end with you criticizing our upbringing and trying to bribe the child with expensive gifts. When everyone had finished their dessert, Pearl stood up and announced, "Coffee will be served in the living room. Doris, please clear the table." The guests began to rise. I noticed Noah, already relieved from his solitary dinner, trying to get his parents' attention, but Pearl, only absent-mindedly, patted him on the head, and Aiden was busy talking to Oliver. "Grandpa," Noah ran up to me. "I drew another picture. Do you want to see it?" "Sure, champ," I smiled. "Show me." We went to a corner of the living room where Noah unfolded a piece of paper in front of me with a picture of a big house and a lot of figures around it. "This is our family home," he explained. "It's mom, dad, me, and you. We all live together." I felt my heart clench. Despite Pearl's best efforts to keep me at a distance, Noah still considered me part of the family. "That's a beautiful drawing," I said quietly. "You're a real artist." The rest of the evening passed in a tense atmosphere. I tried to talk to Aiden about the possibility of seeing my grandson regularly, but he kept avoiding a direct answer, citing the need to coordinate with Pearl. As the guests began to head home, I decided it was time to leave too. I thanked the Talbots for their company, said a polite goodbye to Pearl's parents, and approached Aiden. "Thanks for the evening, son. I hope to see you soon." "Sure, Dad," Aiden nodded, but his gaze avoided mine. "I'll call you next week." Pearl stood beside me, her smile not reaching her eyes. "It was good to see Noah," I added. "He's grown so much since the last time I saw him." "Yeah, kids grow up fast," Pearl said with a fake courtesy, "especially when you don't see them much." I ignored the stiletto. "Dinner was excellent," I lied out of politeness. "Oh, I almost forgot," Pearl exclaimed, as if an idea had suddenly struck her. "Wait a minute." She went quickly to the kitchen and returned with a plastic container into which she had carelessly dumped the rest of her dinner: a piece of turkey, some mashed potatoes, dried beans. "Take it." She handed me the container with barely concealed disdain. "You know what, though?" She suddenly yanked her hand away. "You don't even deserve this." The silence that reigned in the hallway was deafening. Aiden looked at his wife with an expression of shock and shame. Pearl's parents, standing nearby, looked embarrassed but not surprised. The Talbot couple, already putting on their coats, froze, clearly unsure how to react to the scene. I felt a hot wave of humiliation and anger rise in me. In all my years of neglect, Pearl had never been so blatantly insulting. "Pearl," Aiden finally squeezed out. "What are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth," she cut him off. "Your father comes here once a year, criticizes everything we do, and then wonders why he isn't invited more often." "That's not true," Aiden argued. "Dad, I'm sorry. She didn't mean that." I held up my hand, stopping his excuses. "It's all right, Aiden," I said calmly, though I was seething inside. "Your wife is entitled to her opinion." I glanced at Pearl, who stood with her arms crossed defiantly over her chest. "Thank you for your hospitality," I said with an icy calm. "Have a good day." Without waiting for an answer, I turned and walked out, closing the door carefully behind me. Only once I was in the car did I let out a long, shuddering exhale. My hands shook slightly as I put the key in the ignition. This wasn't just another awkward family dinner. It was a public humiliation, deliberate and calculated. Pearl had finally dropped the mask and shown me what she really thought of me, in front of my son, his co-workers, and her parents. I pulled slowly out of the driveway and headed home, feeling the strange calm that comes after a major emotional upheaval. In my mind, I was replaying bits and pieces of the evening: Pearl's disdainful glances, Aiden's awkward attempts to smooth things over, Noah's drawing of our family. The house greeted me with a familiar silence. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in the living room chair, looking at Frances's picture. "Sharon, did you see that, dear?" I asked the smiling face in the picture. "Did you see how your son lets his wife treat his father?" Frances, of course, didn't answer, but I knew what she would have said. She always urged patience and understanding. "People do stupid things when they feel threatened," she used to say. Perhaps Pearl saw me as a threat to her control over Aiden and Noah. But patience has limits. And tonight my limit had been reached. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number. After the third ring, a sleepy voice answered, "Benson Law Offices, answering machine. Leave a message." "Raymond, this is Lloyd Harrington." Sorry for the late call, but I need you to prepare some documents tomorrow. It's about a house on 42 Clover Street. It's time to remind its tenants who it really belongs to. I hung up the phone and took a sip of whiskey. Maybe Pearl was right. I didn't even deserve the leftovers from their table. But she would soon find out that the house she was building her perfect life in had stood on the foundation of my patience all these years. And that foundation has just crumbled. I woke up with the first rays of sunlight streaming through the gaps in the curtains. My head was a little sore from the whiskey I'd drunk the night before, but my thoughts were surprisingly clear. Sometimes decisions made in the moment of emotional upheaval seemed hasty and unwise in the morning. But not this time. Having slept for only 5 hours, I felt firmly convinced of what I was about to do. The clock read 7 a.m. Too early to call my lawyer, but just the right time for a cup of strong tea and reflection. I went down to the kitchen, made the usual tea, and sat by the window, looking out at the garden, which was beginning to prepare for winter. The leaves had almost fallen, revealing the skeletons of the trees. The grass had faded, and the Francis roses I'd continued to nurture over the years had gone dormant until spring. Last night replayed over and over in my mind like a jammed movie. Pearl's face contorted with contempt when she'd uttered those words. "You don't even deserve that." The shock on Aiden's face, the embarrassment of the guests, my own shame and humiliation. And then the calm that came with the decision. 42 Clover Street, a 4-bedroom Victorian mansion with a large garden and a history stretching back to the 19th century. I'd bought it 3 years ago, right after Aiden and Pearl's wedding, when it was clear they were planning to have children and needed a larger place to live than the downtown apartment they'd been renting. I remember the day I first saw the house. The realtor, knowing my preferences and budget, showed me several options. But it was this one that attracted me with its character, its history. It was in need of repair, but the foundation was solid, like everything built in those days. I immediately imagined Aiden and Pearl living there, their kids running around in the spacious rooms, family barbecues in the backyard. Negotiations with the owner were short. I paid the full price without bargaining, $1,200,000. A considerable sum, but not for a man who had just sold a controlling interest in his company for 8 figures. When I informed Aiden and Pearl of the gift, their reactions were different. Aiden was amazed and touched. He hugged me several times, repeating, "Thanks, Dad, that's too generous." Pearl, on the other hand, looked calculatingly pleased, as if she had just received what was already her due. "What a lovely gesture, Lloyd," she said then, and there wasn't an ounce of sincere gratitude in her voice. I remember the first time they looked at the house. Aiden admired the details, the carved staircase railing, the stained glass windows in the living room, the marble fireplace. Pearl, on the other hand, immediately began planning what she would change. "These wooden panels need to be removed. They make the rooms dark. The fireplace will have to be modernized. It's completely inefficient. The garden needs a complete redesign. These old-fashioned rose bushes are taking up too much space." Even then I felt a prick of regret, but pushed it away. After all, it was their home now, and they had the right to furnish it to their liking. Except, it wasn't their home in the full sense of the word. I sighed and took a sip of the now-cooled tea. When the deeds to the house had been drawn up, I'd made a decision that had seemed like a sensible precaution then, but now seemed like a show of distrust, perhaps a just one. I didn't sign the house over to Aiden's name or to him and Pearl jointly. Instead, I had left the house in my ownership, granting Aiden and his family the right of lifetime occupancy, a right that could be revoked at my discretion. My attorney, Raymond Benson, had recommended just that option. "Lloyd," he said then, "your son is newly married. You hardly know his wife. If God forbid the marriage breaks up, half the value of the house will go to her in the divorce. Or if your son wants to sell the house, and young couples often change homes, you'll lose control of your gift." I agreed with his reasoning, but decided not to tell Aiden and Pearl about the legal intricacies. All they were told was that the house was their home, a gift from me, and they could live in it as long as they wanted. I hoped I would never have to reveal the full truth of this arrangement. Pearl must have suspected something was wrong. She'd asked several times about the deeds to the house, about the property taxes that hadn't come to their address for some reason. Aiden waved off her questions. Dad's probably got it all sorted out. Don't worry about it. And I did have everything sorted out. Taxes, insurance, even the utility bills went through my accounts, though Aiden insisted on paying at least that on his own. Now I regretted not being completely honest with my son. Perhaps if he'd known the truth from the beginning, our relationship with Pearl would have developed differently. Or more likely, she would never have allowed him to accept such a gift with conditions. The clock struck 9, a good time to call. I finished my cooled tea and dialed the number. Benson Law Office, how may I help you? A woman's voice answered. Good morning. This is Lloyd Harrington. Is Raymond there? Yes, Mr. Harrington. Just a moment. After a short wait, a familiar voice sounded in the receiver. Lloyd, I got your message last night. It sounded strong. Good morning, Ray. Yes, I'd like to discuss the house on Clover Street. Is there any chance we could meet today? Sure, Raymond sounded interested. I can make some time at 11. Is it urgent? It's urgent enough, I answered. I want to initiate eviction proceedings. There was a pause. Your son? Raymond asked cautiously. His wife, I clarified. And maybe him too, depending on which side he chooses. Another pause. A longer one. Lloyd, this is a big step. Are you sure? Absolutely. Good, Raymond sighed. 11 o'clock then. Bring all the documents you have. I thanked him and hung up. I got up from the desk and headed for the office where all the important papers were kept in the safe. The deeds to the house were in a separate folder, untouched since the purchase. I pulled them out and took a quick look through them. Everything was in order. The house belonged to me. No encumbrances or conditions that might interfere with my decision. Closing the safe, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Despite my formal retirement, I continued to keep up with the company's affairs and check my email regularly. Today, among the usual notifications and mailings was an email from Aiden, sent late last night. Dad, I'm sorry about last night. Pearl was out of sorts. She didn't mean to hurt you. Call me when you can. I grinned bitterly. Didn't mean to offend. After all these years of passive aggression and manipulation, yesterday's prank had been completely intentional, the last straw that had overflowed the cup of my patience. And now Aiden was trying to smooth things over, to take the blame, or make excuses for his wife's behavior, as usual. I didn't answer the email. Instead, I opened the file of photos of the house, the ones taken before the renovation Pearl had started. Here was the spacious living room with the original wood paneling, which she'd ordered stripped and replaced with drywall. Here is the elegant staircase with carved banisters, which she modernized beyond recognition. There's the garden with centuries-old trees, half of which she had half of them cut down to make room for a pool and barbecue area. Every change Pearl made to the house felt like a personal insult to me. Not because she was changing my gift, but because she did it with such disregard for the history and character of the house, the same disregard she had for me. I closed the laptop and looked at the clock. There was still an hour and a half until my meeting with Raymond. I decided to take a shower and change my clothes. Not only was I scheduled to meet with my lawyer today, but also to have lunch with Walter Pierce, my old friend and former business partner, who was in Wilmington for a few days. Under the jets of hot water, I continued to ponder how Aiden and I had gotten to this point. We'd been close once, before Francis died, before my immersion in work as an escape from grief, before his marriage to Pearl. I remembered how we'd gone fishing when he was a boy, how I'd taught him to drive, how we'd picked a college together. And then something broke, and every year the crack got wider and wider. Dressed in a suit, an old habit I couldn't get rid of, even in retirement, I went downstairs and checked my phone. 2 missed calls from Aiden. I didn't bother calling back. This wasn't the time for conversations that would lead nowhere. I needed to finish what I'd started first. Raymond's office was in downtown Wilmington, in an old red brick building that housed various law firms. I arrived at precisely 11 o'clock and went up to the 3rd floor. Lloyd! Raymond met me in the reception area. Come on in. I told him we weren't to be disturbed. Raymond Benson had been my lawyer for the past 20 years, ever since the company had begun to expand, and I needed a reliable legal advisor. A short, stocky man with shrewd eyes and a practical approach to problem solving, he rarely asked unnecessary questions, but always offered balanced solutions. We walked to his office, a spacious room overlooking the river. Raymond gestured for me to sit in the chair across from his desk. "So," he began when we were seated, "you want to evict your son's wife from the house that technically belongs to you. Do I understand the situation correctly?" "Yes," I nodded. "The terms of our agreement always meant that they could live there as I saw fit. I am now revoking that permission. May I ask what happened?" Raymond looked at me without judgment, just with professional interest. I briefly told him about last night's dinner, without going into emotional detail. Raymond listened attentively, making occasional notes in his notebook. "I see," he said when I was done. "And you're sure you want to go that way?" "Eviction is serious, Lloyd. It could permanently damage your relationship with your son." "The relationship is already damaged," I replied. "And I don't see how they can improve as long as Pearl continues to manipulate Aiden and use my gift against me." Raymond nodded, accepting my decision. "Okay, let's see the paperwork." I handed him the folder, and he scrutinized the contents, occasionally pausing at items and rereading them. "Everything is in order," he finally said. "Legally, the house is all yours, and you have the right to decide who lives in it. But I must warn you, the eviction process can be long and unpleasant, especially if they decide to contest it." "Doreen, on what grounds can they challenge it?" I asked. "They can argue that the house was unconditionally gifted, that there was an oral agreement to transfer the property." Raymond shrugged. "Lawyers can be inventive, but given the purity of the documents, they don't stand much of a chance." "How long would the process take?" "Usually 30 to 90 days, depending on how vigorously they resist. The first step is an official eviction notice with a reason." "What kind of reason do we give?" I asked. "Violation of the terms of occupancy," Raymond suggested. "Given that there were no formal terms, we could cite disrespecting the property owner as a violation of the implied terms." I nodded, agreeing with his logic. "What's the next step?" "After the notice is served, they will have a certain period of time to vacate the premises voluntarily. If they don't, we will file a lawsuit for forced eviction. Then there will be a court where both sides will present their arguments and the judge will make a decision." "And what are the chances that the decision will be in my favor?" "Given the paperwork, pretty good," Raymond assured me. "But Lloyd, I ask you again, are you sure you want to go down this road? Maybe you should talk to your son first." It explained the situation. I wondered. Aiden really didn't know the whole truth about the house. Perhaps he thought the house belonged to them and would be shocked to learn the reality of the situation. On the other hand, years of silence and patience had done no good. "I'll think about it," I finally said. "But let's start preparing the documents." Raymond nodded and pressed the intercom button. "Susan, would you bring the eviction notice forms, please?" We spent the next hour filling out the necessary paperwork. I entered all the information, signed the forms where my signature was required, and listened to Raymond explain the procedure again. "I'll send the notice by registered mail with return receipt," he said when we were done. "A copy will also be delivered by courier and pinned to the front door of the house. That way they won't be able to claim they didn't receive the notice." "When is this going to happen?" I asked. "I can send everything today," Raymond replied. "They will get the notice tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, depending on how the post office works." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of determination and regret. "Good, go ahead." We shook hands, and I walked out of Raymond's office with the feeling that I had crossed a certain Rubicon, after which there would be no going back to my old life. It was sunny but cool outside, a typical November day in Wilmington. I decided to walk to the restaurant where I was to meet Walter, and it took about 20 minutes, and in that time I tried to collect my thoughts, to prepare myself for my friend's inevitable questions about my family. Walter was already waiting for me at a table by the window. When he saw me, he stood up and gave me a big hug. We hadn't seen each other in almost a year, not since he'd moved to Florida. "Lloyd, you haven't changed at all, you old fox," he smiled. "You're tanned," I said. "Florida's doing you good." We sat down, ordered drinks and lunch, and the conversation naturally turned to news, work, and mutual acquaintances. I was grateful that Walter didn't ask about Aiden and his family right away. Apparently, he sensed that it was a sensitive topic for me. Only when we were finished with the main course and the waiter brought coffee did Walter ask cautiously, "How's Aiden? Have you seen him lately?" "Yesterday," I nodded. "Thanksgiving. Family dinner." How was it? I could hear the realization in his voice that the answer wasn't going to be very positive. Not great, I admitted. In fact, I just come from my lawyer's office. I'm starting eviction proceedings against Pearl for the house I bought for them. Walter choked on his coffee. What? Lloyd, this is serious. More than serious. I told him briefly about last night's incident. Walter shook his head. It's tough, but are you sure eviction is the right answer? It could ruin your relationship with your son forever. What is our relationship now? I asked bitterly. We see each other once every few months, talking about the weather and work, avoiding any meaningful topics. He allows his wife to control his life and abuse his father. What exactly am I at risk of losing? The chance for reconciliation, Walter answered quietly. A chance for things to change one day. I looked out the window at the passers-by going about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the restaurant's glass. You know, I've been thinking about this for years, I finally said. Waiting, hoping that Pearl would soften, that Aiden would find the strength to resist her manipulations. But every year it just got worse. And now I'm just tired of waiting. Walter nodded understandingly. What are you going to do if Aiden sides with your wife? And he probably will. Then I'll have to accept that I've lost my son, I answered with a heavy weight in my heart. Awana, maybe I'd lost him a long time ago. I just didn't want to admit it. And Noah? Walter asked. Your grandson. Are you ready to lose him too? It was the most painful question of all. Noah, the innocent 6-year-old boy who'd drawn our family together, who'd been so excited for me to come. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I hope Pearl won't use the child as a weapon, I said, though I realized inwardly how naive that hope was. But if she did, well, that would be one more reason not to regret my decision. We finished our lunch in a lighter atmosphere, reminiscing about old times, discussing plans for the future. Walter invited me to come visit him in Florida for Christmas, and I promised to think about the offer. As we said goodbye outside, Walter shook my hand firmly and said, Whatever happens, Lloyd, remember you are not alone. You have friends who will always support you. Thank you, I said sincerely. It means a lot to me. When I got home, I found a few more missed calls from Aiden and one new message. Dad, please call me back. We need to talk. I decided I wouldn't call today. Let him get the notice first, find out the truth about the house, and then we'd talk, if he still wanted to talk to me. I spent the evening sorting through old photos, snapshots of Aiden as a child, our family trips, moments that would never come back. I felt no regret for the decision I'd made, only sadness at the realization that things could have turned out differently if I'd been a more attentive father, if Francis hadn't died so early, if Aiden had chosen a different life partner. But if only doesn't change reality. And the reality is that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, Pearl will get her eviction notice, and a new chapter in our family history will begin. A chapter in which I finally regain control of the situation and perhaps of my own life. The next 2 days passed in a strange state of suspense. I went about my daily business, reading, answering emails, talking on the phone with former coworkers, even going for a routine checkup at the doctor. But all the while in the back of my mind, a countdown clock was ticking. The bomb had been planted, and I was waiting for the moment of detonation. Aiden called a few more times, but I didn't answer. It was a cowardly act, I realized, but I needed time to gather my thoughts before the inevitable confrontation. Besides, I wanted the first blow to come at Pearl. She deserved it after all the years of manipulation and neglect. On the third day after my visit with Raymond, around 3 in the afternoon, the phone rang, Pearl's number. This is it, I thought, the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and answered it. The voice on the other end of the line was sharp, excited. What the hell does that mean, Lloyd? I assume you got the notice, I replied calmly. Notice? Her voice rose an octave. You call that a notice? Is this some kind of sick joke? Are you really trying to evict us from our own house? The house isn't yours, Pearl, I said in a flat tone. It was never yours. It belongs to me. What the hell are you talking about? You gave us this house 3 years ago. We had a housewarming party. You made a toast. I gave you the opportunity to live in it, I clarified. but I still own the property. Check the documents if you don't believe me. Although, judging by the notice attached to the house, your lawyer has already explained the situation to you." There was a pause, and then I heard a puff of breath. Pearl was obviously trying to control her rage. "Nahuanash, you lied to us," she said at last. "All these years you've let us think the house was ours, and you've let us think it was yours." "I never said I gave you ownership," I interrupted. "You made that assumption yourself, and I think you conveniently forgot to ask about the details while you were enjoying all the benefits." "Did Aiden know about this?" she asked suddenly, a new note of suspicion in her voice. "Garen, no," I answered honestly. "I didn't want to embarrass him. He thought the house was really yours." "Oh, how noble," Pearl snickered. "You lied to your own son, but of course it was for his own good." "I wasn't lying," I countered. "I just didn't go into the legal details. The house was a gift with conditions, and the main condition was mutual respect, which I never saw on your part. And that's why you decided to throw us out on the street? Because of one bad Thanksgiving dinner?" She tried to feign outrage, but I could hear the panic in her voice. "Not because of one dinner, Pearl," I said quietly. "It's because of 3 years of constant neglect and manipulation. The way you've systematically alienated my son from me. The way you've restricted my visits with my grandson. Because of every scornful look, every condescending remark, every time you made Aiden choose between you and me." "That's ridiculous," she snorted. "I never forbade Aiden from seeing you. If your relationship has grown cold, you're the one to blame." "Really?" I felt my anger rising inside me, but I kept my voice steady. Who? Who canceled our meetings at the last minute because of sudden plans? Who insisted that Aiden work weekends when I suggested we travel together? Who convinced him that my attempts to participate in Noah's life were attempts to undermine your parental authority? "You're being paranoid," Pearl retorted. "You have no proof." "I don't need proof, Pearl. I know what I've seen and felt all these years. And last night was just the last straw. The moment when you finally showed your true colors, not just to me, but to everyone else. And for that, you chose to punish not only me, but Aiden and Noah." Her voice shook when she mentioned her son. "You're willing to deprive your own grandson of his home?" That question hit a sore spot. Noah was an innocent victim in our adult games, and the thought that he might suffer because of my decision hurt me. But I also knew Pearl was using the child as a weapon, now and always. "You have enough money to rent or buy another house," I said. "Aiden makes good money at the museum, and you get good fees for organizing events, as far as I know. Noah won't be on the street." "Do you really think this is about money?" Pearl exclaimed. "It's his house. He knows every corner. He's got friends in the neighborhood. His room, his stuff. It can all be moved," I replied calmly, "and children adapt faster than adults. But if you're so concerned about Noah's well-being, maybe you should have thought about that before publicly humiliating his grandfather." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard Pearl take a deep breath. "Look, Lloyd." Her voice was suddenly softer, almost ingratiating. "I realize I overreacted yesterday. I was stressed about the holiday preparations, upset about some work stuff. I shouldn't have said those things, and I'm truly sorry for that." I almost laughed. Pearl's typical tactic. When pressure and aggression don't work, she moves on to fake apologies and supposed remorse. "It's too late for apologies, Pearl," I said. "The decision has been made." "But this is crazy." Her voice was harsh again. "You can't just evict us. We have rights." "You have 30 days to vacate the house," I reminded her. "That's more than enough time to find a new place to live." "Huh?" "We're going to fight this," she said threateningly. "I've already talked to a lawyer. He said we can challenge the decision, that the house was a gift to us, and there are witnesses." "Witnesses to what, exactly?" I asked calmly. "That I gave you the house to live in?" "No one disputes that, but the legal documents speak for themselves. I own the house." "Aiden's going to be furious." Pearl changed tactics. He'll never forgive you for this." "Maybe," I admitted with a heavy weight in my heart. "But it's a risk I'm willing to take." "Why?" There was genuine bewilderment in her voice. "Why would you ruin your relationship with your son over a little thing?" "A little thing?" I felt the anger rising inside me again. You think it's petty that you've been methodically destroying our family for years? That you used my son as a pawn in your game? That you denied my grandson the opportunity to know his grandfather? That you turned my gift into a tool of control? You're exaggerating. No, Pearl, I'm finally telling the truth, I interrupted her. You know what the saddest part is? Not only did you take away my relationship with my son and my grandson, you robbed Aiden of his father. You convinced him that the man who worked his whole life for his well-being, who loved him more than anything in the world, was suddenly an obstacle to your happiness. You made him choose between his father and his wife, knowing that he would always side with you in that choice, because he's a good husband and wants his marriage to succeed. That's not true, Pearl objected, but without the same confidence. Yes, it is, I said firmly. And now that you've lost the roof over your head, maybe you'll finally realize that actions have consequences, that you can't manipulate people endlessly and expect them to tolerate it. There was a noise in the receiver. It sounded like Pearl was talking to someone else. Then she returned to the conversation, and her voice sounded strangely strained. Aiden just got here. He wants to talk to you. Before I could answer, my son's voice came through the phone. Excited, confused, with a hint of anger. Dad? What's going on? There's some kind of eviction notice attached to our house. Is there some kind of mistake? I took a deep breath, preparing for the hardest part of this conversation. No, son, there's no mistake. But, why? His voice shook. Because of what happened on Thanksgiving? Pearl's already apologized. She said she overreacted. It's not just that, Aiden, I said softly. There's something you don't know. The house you live in, it legally belongs to me. It always has been. There was a long pause. What? Aiden finally said. But you gave it to us. At the housewarming party, you said, I said it was my gift to you, I clarified. And it was true. I gave you the opportunity to live in a beautiful home without having to worry about mortgages or rent. But I retained ownership. Why? There was genuine surprise in his voice. You didn't trust us? Did you think we'd sell it? I was thinking about marriage being a complicated thing, I answered cautiously. And I wanted to protect you from possible complications. You mean divorce? His voice grew colder. You didn't believe in our marriage from the beginning? I believed in you, Aiden, I said sincerely. But I'd seen how Pearl felt about money, about property, and I didn't want you to ever find yourself in a situation where you had to share this house. So all this time, when we've been putting money into repairs, into improvements, when we've been paying taxes, I paid the taxes, I said quietly, and the insurance. All you paid for were utilities and your own improvements. And you think that justifies cheating? There was anger building in his voice. You lied to me for 3 years. I didn't lie, I countered. I just didn't give up all the details. And frankly, you never asked. Because I trusted you, Aiden almost shouted. I thought my father wouldn't deceive me. His words hit me like a physical blow. He was right. I really hadn't been completely honest with him, but the reasons seemed justified to me. Aiden, I was doing what I thought was right, I said softly. Maybe I was wrong, but that doesn't change the fact that Pearl's behavior all these years has been. Leave Pearl out of this, he interrupted. This is between us, Dad. Between you and me. You betrayed my trust. What about the fact that you let your wife systematically humiliate me? I asked, feeling control of my emotions begin to slip away. How about the fact that you always chose her side, even when she was wrong? How about the fact that you let her limit my interactions with Noah? That's not true, Aiden countered, but there was doubt in his voice. Wasn't it? I asked bitterly. When was the last time you took the initiative to see me? When was the last time you brought Noah to me without first negotiating with Pearl? When was the last time you defended me when she spoke disparagingly about my life, my values, my decisions? Aiden was silent, and I continued, finally releasing everything that had built up over the years. You're my only son, Aiden. After your mother died, you're the most precious thing I have left. And watching you slowly disappear from my life, becoming a shadow next to a woman who's using you for her own ambition, it broke my heart. It tore at my heart. Pearl loves me, Aiden said quietly. She's not perfect, but she's a good mother to Noah, and I don't doubt that in her own way she loves you, I agreed. But love shouldn't require giving up other attachments. True love doesn't isolate, it unites. And that's why you've decided to evict us from the house? There was a bitter disappointment in his voice. That's your way of uniting? It's my way of finally standing up for myself, I answered, to show that I will no longer put up with neglect and manipulation, that my patience and generosity have limits. And now what? Aiden asked after a pause. Do we have 30 days to find a new place to live? Explain to Noah why we're moving? Start from scratch? You have the means, I reminded him. You could rent an apartment or even buy a smaller house. It's not the end of the world, Aiden. Maybe not for you, his voice sounded distant, but for me, for us, it changes everything. I felt something clench in my chest, the fear that I really could lose my son forever. Aiden, I started softer. Maybe we could. No, Dad, he interrupted. I don't want to hear any suggestions or compromises right now. You made a decision without consulting me, without telling me. Now we're gonna do what we think is right. What does that mean? I asked cautiously. It means we're going to look for a new place to live, he said with determination in his voice, and rethinking our relationship. Aiden, please don't make any rash decisions, I asked. Let's meet. Talk in person. Now's not the time, Dad, he cut him off. I need to calm Pearl down and think about how to explain all this to Noah. I'll get back to you later. Before I could say anything, he hung up. I slowly set the phone down on the table, feeling a strange mixture of relief and devastation. The conversation hadn't gone as I'd planned. I'd hoped Aiden would at least try to understand my motives, but his reaction was predictable. Shock, a sense of betrayal, anger. I wondered what Pearl had told him the whole time I'd been talking to her before he came. What version of events did she present? Knowing her, there is no doubt that she portrayed herself as the innocent victim of my vindictiveness. I got up and went to the window. The day was winding down, the shadows lengthening, the last rays of sunlight gilding the treetops. The world continued to exist despite the little human dramas playing out within its confines. The phone rang, Aiden's number again. I hesitated but answered it. Yes? It's Pearl. Her voice sounded oddly calm. Aiden had gone to get some air. I wanted to tell you one last thing. I'm listening, I answered warily. You think you've won, she said slowly, that you've taught me a lesson. But what you don't realize is that you've lost more than you've gained. Aiden will never forgive you for that betrayal, and Noah. You'll never see your grandson again. Is that a threat? I asked, feeling a chill go down my spine. No, it's a statement of fact, her voice was icy. You destroyed all the bridges yourself, and now you're going to live with the consequences. Pearl, don't drag the child into our conflicts, I asked. It's not his fault. You brought him into it when you decided to foreclose on his home, she said. Whatever happens next is on your conscience. And she hung up without giving me a chance to respond. I stood there clutching the phone, and I could feel the fear creeping up on me. Not for myself, but for Noah, for Aiden. What if Pearl was right? What if I really had destroyed all the bridges, chasing the fleeting satisfaction of revenge? But then I remembered all those years of humiliation and manipulation. All the times Pearl had used my love for my son and grandson as a weapon against me. All the times Aiden had let her do it, acquiescing to her control. No, I couldn't go on living like this. If the price of regaining my dignity is the loss of my relationship with my son, well, it's a painful but necessary price to pay. At least Aiden now knew the truth about the house, about my motives. What he decides to do with that truth is his choice. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. Suddenly, I felt terribly tired, as if all the weight of my years and unrealized hopes had fallen on me at once. At this moment, I felt the absence of Frances most keenly. She'd always known how to reconcile Aiden and me when we fought. She would find the right words to heal that wound, but Frances wasn't there. It was just me, an old, stubborn man who had finally decided to stand up for himself, even if the price was loneliness. And the strange thing was, despite the pain and fear, I felt a kind of relief. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying all these years had finally been lifted. Maybe Pearl was right. and I'd lost Aiden and Noah forever. But I had myself back. And right now it felt like a small, bitter victory in a war I didn't even realize I was fighting. A war for my own dignity. The week after the phone call with Aiden and Pearl passed in oppressive silence. I waited for a call, a letter, even a visit from my angry son. But nothing happened. The silence was heavier than any accusation or reproach. The unknown was more exhausting than open conflict. On the 8th day, I couldn't stand it any longer and called Raymond to see if they had been contacted through a lawyer. No formal objections have been filed yet, Raymond informed me. But that doesn't mean they aren't preparing a legal response. They have time. Do you think they'll contest the eviction? I asked. It's hard to say, Raymond replied after a pause. Legally, they don't stand a chance, and any competent lawyer should be able to explain that to them. But if your sister, in law, is determined, sometimes people go to court even when they know they're losing, just to buy time or annoy their opponent. I thanked him and hung up, feeling vaguely uneasy. What if Pearl decided to turn this case into a protracted legal battle? I could afford the legal fees, but the thought of our family conflict going public made me uncomfortable. Toward evening, the doorbell rang. I opened it without asking who it was. At my age, I wasn't afraid of unexpected visitors. Aiden stood on the doorstep. He was gaunt, with circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept a few nights in a row. "May I come in?" he asked quietly without greeting. I stepped aside silently, letting him into the house. Aiden walked into the living room and stopped in the middle of the room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. Maybe it was. He hadn't been here in months. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, not knowing how to start the conversation. "No thanks," he shook his head. "I won't be long." We sat in the chairs opposite each other, like strangers in a formal meeting. Aiden was looking past me, avoiding my direct gaze. "I came to tell you that we found a new place to live," he said finally. "It's a rented apartment downtown. We're moving in 10 days. So soon?" I was surprised. "You still have time." "We want to get this over with as soon as possible," Aiden interrupted. "Especially Pearl. She doesn't want to stay in a house that doesn't belong to her a day longer than necessary." "I understand," I nodded. "What about Noah? How did he take the news of the move?" Aiden's face twitched. "What do you think?" He was upset. He cried, asked why we had to move out of our house. "And what did you tell him?" I asked him cautiously. "That sometimes adults make decisions that are hard to explain to children." Aiden grinned bitterly. "Pearl wanted to tell him the truth, that his grandfather was kicking us out because he was mad at Mom, but I wouldn't let her." "Thank you," I said quietly. "I didn't do it for you," Aiden said sharply. "I did it for Noah. He was going through enough." We were quiet for a moment. The ticking of the old wall clock, the same one Francis had once picked out, was clearly audible in the silence. "I didn't expect you to find a place so quickly," I said at last. "There aren't many apartments available in Wilmington." "We were lucky," Aiden shrugged. "Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. The apartment was vacant because the previous tenants went bankrupt and couldn't pay the rent. Either way, it's in a good neighborhood, close to Noah's school, so he won't have to change friends and teachers." "That's good," I nodded. "What about—" I hesitated, not knowing how to phrase the question. "The legal side of it?" "Pearl said she was going to contest the eviction." "Ha, we decided not to," Aiden said, a tiredness in his voice. "Or rather, I convinced Pearl that it was pointless. Our lawyer said the paperwork was impeccable, and we had almost no chance of winning the case. I was relieved that at least there wouldn't be a public scandal." "I'm glad you made a reasonable decision," I said. "Reasonable?" Aiden looked me straight in the eyes for the first time, and I saw the pain and anger in them. "Was it wise of you to deceive us for 3 years? Was it smart to use the house as leverage when you felt you'd been treated disrespectfully?" "I never planned to use the house as leverage," I objected. It had been a gift with conditions that Pearl had consistently violated. "What conditions?" Aiden exclaimed. "You never said anything about conditions. You just handed us the keys and said, 'This is your house now.' If there were some secret clauses in the contract, maybe you should have mentioned them." "The main condition was mutual respect," I answered quietly. "And it didn't need to be specifically written down. It's implicit in any family relationship." "Respect?" Aiden grinned bitterly. You're talking about respect when you didn't respect us enough to be honest? When you decided to punish us like naughty children instead of just talking? I tried to talk, I reminded him, for years. But Pearl always found a way to avoid a serious conversation, and you always took her side. Because she's my wife, Aiden raised his voice. Of course I'm on her side, just like she's on mine. It's called marriage, Dad. Maybe you've forgotten what it is in the years since Mom died. His words struck a nerve. The memory of Frances was still painful, even after all these years. I remember very well what a real marriage is, I said with pressure. And what you and Pearl have is nothing like the relationship your mother and I had. Frances would never manipulate me into choosing between her and my parents. She would never use you as a weapon. Don't you dare compare, Aiden almost hissed. You don't know Pearl like I do. Yes, she's a complicated character. Yes, she can be harsh and say things she regrets. But she loves me and Noah. She does everything for our family, including systematically alienating you from your father, I asked. Is that for the good of the family too? Aiden stood up and paced the room, clearly trying to control his emotions. You're simplifying everything, he said finally. You're reducing a complicated relationship to a simple formula. Pearl's bad, I'm good. But the reality is more complicated than that. Enlighten me, I offered, staying in my chair. Aiden paused by the fireplace, looking at the photos on the shelf. Family snapshots from different years. He's little with us. He's a teenager. He's a college graduate. You were a good father, Dad, he finally said in a quieter voice. But after Mom died, something broke between us. You went to work, I went to school, and friends. We lived in the same house, but we hardly ever really talked. When I met Pearl, she was my salvation. Someone I could be myself with without fear of disappointment or upset. She accepted me whole, with all my weaknesses and flaws. I wanted to argue that I'd always accepted him for who he was, but I kept silent, letting my son speak for himself. Pearl saw how much the distance between us hurt me, Aiden continued. And yes, she may have overreacted at times, trying to protect me from more disappointments. But she did it out of love for me, not out of malice. Art, did you ever think that maybe I suffered from that distance too? I asked quietly. That I didn't know how to overcome it either? That I was in pain too? Aiden turned to me and I saw a mixture of anger and sadness in his eyes. Then why didn't you say it? Why didn't you try to change things? I tried, I countered. But every time I took a step toward it, Pearl found a way to get in the way. Canceled appointments, urgent matters that came up just when we were planning to spend time together. It wasn't just a random set of coincidences, Aiden. So this is all Pearl's revenge? Aiden grinned bitterly. You're depriving us of our home because you have a grudge against my wife? No, I shook my head. Okana, I'm doing this because I've finally realized that you can't build a healthy relationship with someone who sees you only as a source of material goods. Pearl never saw me as a member of the family. To her, I was just a rich father-in-law from whom you could get a house, money, status. And when I was no longer useful, she thought she could humiliate me with impunity. That's not true, Aiden countered, but without the same confidence. Isn't it? I raised an eyebrow. Then why did she get so angry when she found out I owned the house? If she really cared about the family's well-being and not the property, she would have handled it differently. Aiden was silent, and I realized that my words had struck a nerve. Perhaps he'd noticed it in his wife's character, but he didn't want to admit it. Anyway, he said at last, we're leaving. Pearl has already found a new school for Noah for next year, a private school with an advanced study of the arts. She thinks he'll be better off in a new environment. A new school? I frowned. But you said the apartment wasn't far from his current school. Yeah, but... Aiden hesitated. We're thinking about longer-term plans. What kind of plans, I asked, feeling my anxiety rising. Pearl suggested moving out of Wilmington, Aiden admitted, not looking at me, to Philadelphia or even New York. There are more opportunities for her career there, and mine too. Bigger museums, more interesting exhibitions. Are you kidding me? I couldn't believe my ears. You're going to leave the town where you both grew up, where Noah goes to school, where all your friends are, just because Pearl resented me? It's not about resentment, Aiden countered. We've been thinking about moving for a long time. It just accelerated the decision. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Where had he gone? The confident boy who always had his own opinions? That young man who stood up for his beliefs even in the face of peer disapproval? Now standing in front of me was a man who let his wife make all the important decisions in their lives, including such drastic ones as moving to another city. "And you're okay with that?" I asked quietly. "Do you really want to leave?" Aiden shrugged. "Change could be good for them. Noah will adapt. Kids adapt easily to new environments." "What about you?" I insisted. "You want to leave your job at the museum, friends, the places associated with your childhood, with the memory of your mother?" For a moment, something flashed in Aiden's eyes. Doubt, pain, maybe even fear. But then his face was impenetrable again. "Sometimes you have to move forward," he said. "Not everyone can be frozen in time like you are." His words hurt, but I knew there was some truth in them. After Francis died, I'd been frozen in a way, clinging to the past, to memories, to routines. "Maybe you're right," I admitted. "Maybe I really should have moved forward more decisively. But that doesn't mean you should let Pearl make all the decisions for both of you." "She doesn't make decisions for me," Aiden replied sharply. "We discuss things together. Humiliatingly, and yet somehow her wishes always take priority," I pointed out. "It's called compromise, Dad." Aiden shook his head. "Sometimes it's me, sometimes it's her. This time, maybe I would." I realized that further argument was futile. Aiden had already made his decision, or rather let Pearl make it for both of them, and nothing I could say would change that. "When do you plan to leave?" "Huh?" I asked, changing the subject. "I'm not sure yet." Aiden looked away again. "I need to get settled in first, and then I'll look for a job at the museums in Philadelphia. Maybe in a couple months." "And Noah," I couldn't help but ask, "would I be able to see him before you leave?" Aiden tensed. "It's complicated, Dad. Noah's really upset about the move right now. Pearl thinks he needs time to adjust without more emotional upheaval." "By emotional upheaval, you mean seeing Grandpa?" I asked bitterly. "Pearl doesn't think it's a good time," Aiden answered evasively. "Maybe later, when things have calmed down." "When does Pearl think things will calm down?" I couldn't help my sarcasm. "When you're hundreds of miles away? When Noah forgets what I look like?" "Don't be so dramatic, Dad," Aiden frowned. "No one's saying you won't be able to see your grandson. It's just not right now." "And you're okay with that?" I asked bluntly. "Do you really think it's right to deprive Noah of the grandfather he loves just because his mother holds a grudge?" Aiden was silent, and in his silence I could read the answer clearer than any words. He was choosing Pearl's side again, even if deep down he didn't agree with her decision. "I have to go," he said at last, heading for the exit. "I just wanted to let you know our plans in person, not through lawyers." I stood up and followed him into the hallway. "Aiden," I called out as he reached for the doorknob. "I never wanted it to end like this." He turned around, and for a moment I thought I saw in his eyes the old Aiden. My boy who always came to me with his problems, his joys, his dreams. "I know, Dad," he said quietly, "but sometimes our actions have consequences we don't foresee." With those words, he walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. I went back into the living room and sat down in the chair, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Aiden was gone, and I didn't know when or under what circumstances we would see each other again. Perhaps he would actually leave for another city. Perhaps Pearl would get her way, and I would never see my grandson again. I may have just lost my family, the last thing that connected me to a normal, fulfilling life. And yet, despite the pain and regret, I felt something else. A strange relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For years, I'd let Pearl and Aiden manipulate me, using my love and guilt. For years, I'd endured humiliation and neglect for fear of losing my last connection to my son. And now, when the worst had happened, when I really could have lost him forever, I felt free. Free from having to constantly prove my love and devotion to people who took them for granted. Free from manipulation and emotional blackmail. Free to be themselves, albeit lonely, albeit sad, but authentic. I looked at Frances' picture on the mantelpiece. She was smiling her warm, understanding smile that always gave me strength in difficult times. What would you say now, my love? I asked quietly. Would you approve of my decision? Or would you think I had gone too far? Frances didn't answer, of course, but somewhere in the back of my mind I knew she would have understood. She had always valued dignity and self-respect as much as family ties. She taught me that true love does not require sacrificing oneself completely, dissolving into another person. Real love is based on mutual respect and support, not manipulation and control. A week after Aiden's visit, I received a short message from Raymond. They have vacated the house. I have the keys. What do we do next, I wondered. The house at 42 Clover Street was the big, beautiful mansion I had once chosen with such hope and love. Now it stood empty, awaiting the decision of its fate. Sell it, I replied, after much deliberation. Find a good family who will appreciate his history and character. Maybe it was symbolic to part with a house that was supposed to be a bridge between me and my son's family, but instead had become an apple of discord. Maybe it was another step toward letting go of the past, toward accepting a new reality. That evening, I sat on the veranda for a long time watching the sunset. The air was cool but not cold, the perfect weather for reflection. I thought about Aiden, about Noah, about Pearl, about how strange human destinies were, how relationships changed unexpectedly, how easy it was to lose something that seemed immutable. I didn't know what the future would bring. Perhaps in time Aiden would reconsider his position. Perhaps when Noah grows up, he'll want to find contact with me himself. Perhaps even Pearl would one day realize that her desire for control was destroying not only my relationship with my son, but also his own freedom. But no matter what happened, I knew one thing. I would no longer be a victim of manipulation. I had regained control of my life, my dignity, my right to say no to toxic relationships. And though the price was high, perhaps too high, it was worth the sense of self-respect I had gained. The sun disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind a soft pink glow in the west. I finished my tea, which had long since gone cold, and rose from my chair. Night was ahead of me, followed by a new day. A day I would live by my own rules, with my own joys and sorrows, my own memories and hopes. A day in which I would finally be me, without masks, without compromise, without fear of losing what may have been lost long ago. And that, strangely enough, had its own sad but liberating beauty.